Reykjavik, Antony.
I can hear you loud and clear. Thank you, Berger, very much for the introduction. Thank you also for giving the 101 for blockchain before I even got started.
Yeah,
I really
right.
appreciate that.
So the stage is yours.
I've only got a half an hour, so I don't know how much of the background of blockchain I'm going to be able to cover in this short period of time, but if anybody wants to reach out, connect with me, I'm very happy to have that conversation anytime, any place. What I'm going to talk about today over the next 30 minutes is three particular topics that I think are particularly important for this industry, for anybody in Iceland and anybody around the world. I'm going to talk about health, I'm going to talk about travel, and I'm going to talk about sustainability. And how that pertains to blockchain or the relevance of blockchain technology, I spent the last 5 years of my career focused on multi-party systems, developing technology in collaboration with multiple organizations, developing technology together, not in one individual company's house, making small incremental improvements, transforming entire industries together or entire supply chains or value chains together with technology platforms and data. There's not an awful lot more to it than that. Yes, there are some complications under the hood, but largely for those in the audience, when it comes to blockchain, it's about data, it's about working together, and it's about transformation. And so I'm going to give you guys some examples today of what I think that looks like for you, or what it could look like for you, why it's relevant, why it's interesting for the tourism industry specifically, and more broadly for Iceland. So let's get into it. I'm going to share my slides. Bear with me for a second. So can everybody see a slide saying every business is now a health business? Harry, excellent. Thank you so much. So whether we like it or not, over the last 18 months, there has been one major overarching proof that we've required, and that is proof that we are low risk or proof of our health. Whether that be proof of recovery, whether that be proof of a test, whether it be proof of vaccination, particularly in terms of travel and immigration, but in a number of different industries that find it difficult to socially distance, that have had to continue operating over the last 18 months, mission critical industries. This has been a major consideration for every business out there. Do we need to think about our own testing protocol? How do we manage data? How do we manage the privacy? How do we think about GDPR or HIPAA or any of the regulations regarding the health data of our staff or our customers? Right? And how do we make sure that the credentials of people who we're verifying are legitimate? And as we move forward out of the pandemic, as we start seeing different government and private sector solutions around health credentials popping up, how are we going to integrate that into our day-to-day, into our processes, into booking, into physical processes when we're outdoors? How does that fit with mobility, with any of the other technologies we have at our disposal? And I've been working over the past 18 months with governments, airlines, the travel industry, booking agents, travel technology providers, every stakeholder you can imagine, and everybody is equally concerned, confused, trying to figure out what's next. And I don't have the complete answer for you, I'm afraid, but it's an illustration of what people are saying and what this means for companies. So one data point to think about here is, about 12 months ago, people were saying, how are we going to manage the return to work? Obviously, social distancing will become a part of it. 95% of people surveyed said that. 78, 79% said that PPE is going to continue to be a thing. Yes, it probably is, masks, etc. 65% said we need to manage symptoms checking or testing on a regular basis, maybe even daily, as part of our day-to-day operations. Right? And the logistics around that, around the technology, around the cost, not insignificant. Fast forward 12 months later, and in the next survey we took, we said as many as 55% of employers are looking at incentivizing staff to be vaccinated. Now, this is a particularly emotive topic, and you'll see people on both sides of the fence around vaccination, around testing, and so on. And that's not something we're necessarily going to discuss here, but the role of vaccinations, the role of proving that you've been vaccinated or not, what are the journeys for those who are unable to be vaccinated, who choose not to be vaccinated? How do we make sure that we achieve equity or equality in those customers, those citizens, those colleagues and employees who are wanting to still come to work, to experience travel, to do the things they were always doing before? Critical considerations for every organization at this point in time. And so IBM, along with a number of different others out there, have been developing technology to address this. The concept of a digital health passport, digital health pass, is probably not unfamiliar to this audience. And for those wanting to understand what's the role of blockchain, let's start with the three participants involved. You've got the individual themselves, me, the citizen, the passenger, the employee, the colleague, the pilot, whoever it might be. I want to hold my particular credentials so that I can verify that I am who I say I am and that I have an up-to-date credential. I have a relationship with an issuer, what we call an issuer, a health provider who will be conducting a test, a vaccination, whatever it might be. And there will be a contract between those two parties. There'll be data exchange between those two parties. And from that issuer, we want to create a credential, a digital ticket, a digital proof that I have been vaccinated, tested, whatever it might be. And that will be exchanged with the individual. That individual then has the responsibility to verify wherever it is required, either by policy or by company obligation. I then need to go verify with another third party that I am who I say I am and that I have an up-to-date credential. So I either share it in advance or I share it face-to-face, scan a mobile QR code, scan a document, whatever it might be. And that verifier then needs to look up, is this person who they say they are? That could either be with a physical proof or it could be with a digital proof. And then is that credential issued by somebody that we recognize or that we trust? And where the blockchain platform, where the technology underneath comes, is the encryption, the private key management, and the trust that allows a verifier to look up and say, this hospital, this healthcare provider, this government issued my credentials, I can trust them, and no other information is exchanged. No private information, no PII is exchanged on the platform. It only remains with the individual on their device or on a portal, and with the issuer where you have a contract for a particular piece of healthcare interaction. And that's it. And then scaling it out into a number of different journeys. Now, the complication here is, yes, you have to onboard issuers. It's then also about how do we make sure that verifiers can recognize the multiple different types of passport that are out there. Here's what it looks like. So you may have one of these yourself. You may have a digital or a physical version of it, but ultimately you'll see a test record. You'll see information there saying, this is my COVID test result, or this is my vaccination, second dose, first dose. Here's a QR code that I can share or scan for a period of time. I can revoke that permission to scan for a period of time, or I can close the phone and revoke it physically if I choose to. On the other side, on the credential check side, the point here is to provide as little information that is personal or none at all to the checker, to the verifier, saying this credential hasn't expired, it's valid, it's not been revoked, the platform can tell us these things, it's a recognized and trusted signature, and it meets the criteria that I've set for somebody gaining access onto the flight, into this building, into this facility. And that's about it. But here comes the complication. And here's the interesting thing for the travel industry is that over the next 2, 3, 4 months, we're going to see a proliferation of these solutions. Private sector solutions that are already in place. IBM's Digital Health Pass, Clear, Accredify, from all regions of the world. We're going to see industry-specific solutions. IATA, maybe specific sports or industry-specific solutions. We're going to see a number of government solutions specific to either the European Union or individual nation states who will be issuing credentials to their citizens. How do all of these different passports, scans, credentials get accepted? And this is the part that IBM plays. Yes, we know a little bit about developing a health pass because we have our own, but the critical part here is how do we integrate that into booking processes, ticketing processes, and so on, so that we can ensure that it's streamlined, it's easy, it's simple. Hopefully that's given you a little bit of the context of the what, a little bit as to why. The how, we'll probably have to leave for another day for the sake of time. But as you're thinking through this, and as I said, health passports are a very, very emotive topic. Everybody has a different perspective on these things. We must think about, firstly, standards. And there's a number of different working groups that are out there that IBM and others are part of around standards for data, standards for credential management. What are the types of credential? How do we scan them? How do we issue them? Interoperability, as I talked about, between multiple parties. Digital enablement, how do we integrate this into the existing digital experience customers are used to experiencing, or how do we upgrade or modify that experience so that we can do it seamlessly? Because what we don't want in the middle of a pandemic is hundreds of thousands of people queuing up in airports, at venues, at events, waiting to scan, waiting to verify, because large queues of people gathering around in a pandemic is generally what we're trying to avoid. Also, those delays are going to create a terrible customer experience. Inclusivity and accessibility. There are non-digital journeys. There are less digitally aware people out there who need to be supported. And how do we make sure that happens? Public-private collaboration. We're seeing a lot of that, and that has been turbocharged in the last 18 months. That governments typically don't deliver technology at speed, which is where the private sector is supportive, but governments and the public sector do drive the policy. So how can we get those two sides working hand in hand to deliver policy and technology at pace? And also supported by the science, the policy and epidemiology that supports the decision making as to when or why we want to use these sorts of things, because ultimately nobody wants to see digital credentials being used for going and buying milk and bread. It's just not the sort of technology we need in that level of invasiveness. So a start to this part of the conversation. Next, sustainability. And I realize this is a very big flip from health passports to sustainability, but stick with me. And my thesis here, sustainability is a data problem. Many people say that the term data is the new oil. I see data as the new fuel. Data fuels visibility. Data fuels transparency. Data fuels interest. What they say is what gets measured gets managed. The more information we can provide around at a granular level, the sustainability of our operations, whether that be in travel, tourism, logistics, manufacturing, the more visibility we have as to how bad it really is, the sooner we can get a handle on the problem. This is the great acceleration. And if you look at these different graphs, on the left-hand side, you can see the socioeconomic trends, the trends that humans are impacting on the world. World population, water use, urban population, paper production, fertilizer consumption, transportation, all growing exponentially. And then on the right-hand side, you look at the Earth system trends, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, nitrous oxide, surface temperature, ocean acidification, also growing at an exponential rate. And here is our problem. As businesses, as organizations, we're quite used to managing things in a linear fashion. If I look forward to 2050, for example, which is a year in the distance that most organizations, many have set as their target for achieving net zero, you can say, okay, that's 30 years from now or 29 years from now. I can imagine how old am I going to be in 29 years' time? How old are my kids going to be? I can kind of see forward to that. It's also sufficiently far away that I don't have to worry about it too much. But linear curves are easy for the human brain to understand. Exponential curves, though, and this is the rate at which these negative patterns are happening on our planet, 10 years forward, for example, growing at an exponential rate is not 10, it's 1,024. So the impact of what was happening in 1 year versus what's happening in 10 years at a linear pace versus an exponential pace is quite prolific. You then fast forward those 30 years, rather than going in incremental steps, you don't end up at 30 years from now, you end up at over 1 billion times the impact, or 1 billion times the number you first started with in 2021. So exponential curves are particularly dangerous because trying to approach them in a linear fashion will not come close to driving the size of change that we need to impact. We need to look at an exponential threat with technologies and exponential capabilities that can create change at a much, much greater rate. Which leads me back to the point I made at the beginning about working together. Climate change and sustainability are not going to be addressed by individual corporations improving 1 or 2% every year. It is about radical transformation. And where it comes to data, supply chains, and systems, this is where blockchain comes in. Blockchain is a data platform that connects to multiple different parties across any industry, any supply chain, any value chain, that allows you to get real-time, relevant, secure, privacy-preserving information of whatever you need to know about the provenance of a goods, its location, its state, its temperature. Any parties can join the system. It can be permissioned so that only regulators can see certain information. Manufacturers may not be allowed to see certain information from their suppliers because it might affect procurements in the future, but that information is still required from a compliance perspective. We can join anybody together on these sorts of systems and create different applications, different ways of looking at problems, different workflows, different ways of delivering experiences, or different ways of sharing information. And on top of that, then we can provide certain functionality to businesses or to customers that will allow them to act differently around traceability, around certifications and proof that something has been sustainably managed or delivered. Insights, intelligence, information. Imagine an artificial intelligence that can optimize the way that your products are delivered to minimize carbon footprint rather than to maximize profit, which is one of the metrics that's typically used. And we can open this up to the open source community. The one thing that blockchain is particularly good at is engaging with the open source community to develop new functionality, new features, new integrations. So what do we do with that? Everyone's aware of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, 17 places to go and look for issues, opportunities, collaborations. I'll give you an even better one, Project Drawdown, which looks at a list of about the top 100 ways in which we can reduce atmospheric CO2. And within this, you look at some of the issues here. You look at materials, you look at reduced waste, more use of plant-based diet, education, use of electricity or renewable electricity, silvopasture, different ways of conducting farming activity. If we're able to identify the current position against any of these metrics today across an entire supply chain or across an entire country, we can track that, we can measure it, we can get granular data from all of the different parties involved. We can understand the scale of the problem, we can start to drive some change. And we must do that with a mantra of people, planet, and profit. Historically, capitalism's been very good at the bottom one, but we must make sure that in everything we do, we can also do that sustainably from a planet perspective and also from an ethical and a social perspective. This is the triple bottom line that organizations must now be measured against. And so here's some ideas of how we can do it. Starting with IBM Food Trust. Started through collaborations with large retailers like Walmart and Carrefour to trace back the origin of food produce so that we can manage recalls more efficiently or food safety more efficiently. But actually, if you look down the list here, there's a number of different other outcomes you can use in that platform for. Food safety, freshness, reduced waste, focus on sustainable sourcing to drive efficiencies and also brand trust and engagement with consumers. One platform, multiple applications. Right? Same thing with supply chains. If you have a data platform that underpins the activity that you do, you can use that for managing applications around reducing plastics, reducing carbon output, waste management, a number of different applications, all sitting on the same underlying technology, which is where this is super powerful. We work with an organization called Food Cloud, who are looking at extending the life of food produce and distributing that to charitable groups. This is specifically for the UK, but a number of other geographies as well. And how do we make more of the food that we have? But also, as the food gets towards the end of its life, we need to make sure that it is safe for those who are consuming it. We don't want to create health problems just by reducing waste. Working with organizations like Yara to maximize the yield from agriculture by sharing data across farming, weather, satellite data, supply chain data, demand data. How do we understand better and make more out of the available scarce land that we have by being smarter? IBM's Net Zero platform, which allows organizations to look across a dashboard of different particular metrics, whether that be emissions, whether that be energy usage, electricity usage across their operations, and be able to allow management to have greater understanding of the scale of the problem and match and track their performance against certain metrics, and allow their banks, their financiers, and the market to do the same. And working with organizations like Plastic Bank, or in Japan, Mitsui, or Asahi Kasei, to manage circularity or encourage circularity, increase the reuse of the materials that they produce in terms of particularly plastic or others, whether that be lithium-ion batteries, whether that be raw materials. How do we make sure that we're using less or recycling more, and that that's more transparent in the way that we do things? So, some ideas for you. A quick guide on innovation before I get into the final point around public-private partnerships. Everybody should know what one of these is. This is the humble vegetable peeler. Friend of every student out there, well, maybe not every student's big on vegetables, but about 10, 15 years ago, a company called Oxo Good Grips came out and said, we are going to radically transform the sector. We are going to take the humble vegetable peeler and we are going to make it sharper, darker, rubberized for your enjoyment, easier to grip, etc., etc. We are going to transform and completely change the game. And to an extent, they sold a lot of products. It is an excellent vegetable peeler. But what the consumers actually want is peeled vegetables. So as you're thinking about transforming the industry sectors, you're transforming travel, transforming hospitality, whatever it might be, do not start with the reference point of a slightly improved rubberized vegetable peeler. Start with understanding what is the actual impact, the actual change we want to drive, and what would need to be true for us to get there. Blockchain in and of itself will not save the world. This is the source of the particular phrase that goes against my podcast and YouTube channel, but ultimately it is a tool in the hands of people who get to use it, as is every technology. We will change the world if we use those capabilities, if we work together, if we bring innovations and we focus on driving the actual change that we want, as opposed to incremental improvements that won't get us anywhere near up the exponential curve that we're focusing on. So it's about collaboration. As you leave this lecture theatre today, don't think about what can I do in my company, think about what can I do in my industry. Who could I bring together to drive change? A point that I've taken from a number of different episodes, and this is the shameless plug of my podcast, my apologies for that, but the point is, through having conversations with a number of different stakeholders in the likes of Brazil, Switzerland, India, Malta, Israel, Singapore, where transformation, particularly around multi-party systems and blockchain, is particularly successful is where we see public-private partnerships at scale. The likes of the Dutch Blockchain Coalition, where they have a permanent function to drive innovation between government and the private sector. No project is ever allowed to be initiated without government and at least one private sector member and without at least one startup. And they have funding behind that. Blockchain Israel, a working group specifically to bring those multiple parties together. Two Tokens looking at the token economy in the Netherlands, or Tribe, an accelerator in Singapore, that again is designed to specifically seek out, fund, and accelerate those innovative businesses that are going to drive change in particular sectors. In these cases, specifically focused on blockchain technology, but it could be any other. The problems are coming from government, they're coming from the private sector, and they're being driven through, facilitated, and supported by those organizations. At this point, we don't need any more technology evangelists. My job is not about telling you how amazing blockchain is. My job is about helping you understand how to collaborate, how to work together, and how to address problems, and that it is possible. We need more influencers. We need those in the room to think about collaboration models, to look at some of the technologies that are out there and try and figure out what's the best available to be able to drive the transformations that we need. And in healthcare, in travel, in tourism, in hospitality, in logistics, in manufacturing, in fisheries, blockchain is a technology that is driving transformation, that is driving transparency, that's driving visibility, that's driving change. And so we're very open to sharing our thoughts with you guys. We're very open to collaboration in any extent. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Quick question, if you're still with us. Are you still with us here? Can you hear us?
I am still with you.
Oh, perfect, perfect. Thank you so much for your talk. Quick question. So a lot of people tuning in here are maybe represent medium or even small-sized companies in the Icelandic travel industry. I guess this is such a big transformation, blockchain technology. They're waiting for the bigger entities to do something, the government. And you're talking about this has to be a cooperative initiative between the government and the private sector. Like, is it like what could be the first step to make use of blockchain technology for a small Icelandic travel company?
So first thing I would say is don't start with blockchain. Start with the problem. Start thinking about what can we change that involves everybody to work together. In thinking about it that way, you might end up with a solution that requires a multi-party platform, whether that be relating to loyalty or sustainability or visibility of vehicle usage or land usage or footfall, or maybe something related to payments between those parties, or there's a number of different processes or systems where we're saying, how do we take 50% of the carbon out of domestic travel in Iceland? How would we do that? How would we incentivize it? Here's where the government comes in. And how would we measure it? If we start with those questions, we start with some great ideation and getting the parties in the room. And if we can get the triple bottom line of benefit for people, benefit for planet, and also we can do that with profit, that's where you're going to start driving some of these initiatives. The likes of the Dutch Blockchain Coalition or Tribe in Singapore were government initiated. So they knew they had an imperative or drive to innovate. I hope that's still the same in Iceland. I hope there's still a focus towards technology investment and driving innovation. For the industry, though, there are existing forums, there are existing working groups where these sorts of questions can be asked, where these sorts of proposals can be put together, and it can be on one sheet of white paper. It doesn't have to be too sophisticated.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time and your talk, Antony Day from IBM.